So how many of you guys consider yourself a change agent? All right. Maybe we'll get some more hands up within the next 12 minutes or so. I got my start as a change agent early. About 26 years ago, I woke up the morning of May 5th to discover that my brother committed suicide. I remember waking up that morning to voices in the kitchen below me thinking it was too early for my Nana's pinochle game to have started. She was watching us that weekend because my parents were away. I remember later that day, just vivid moments, heart-wrenching and awful, especially as my parents got home that afternoon, sobbing, depleted and defeated. Why? Why would this thing happen? And what could we have done to have stopped it? I also remember later that day standing alone on the driveway as the sun was setting behind the house, when the thought, really the sentiment came through my body that we would probably never know why this thing happened, and that we would have learning and transcendence nonetheless. Now, I had just turned 13, so I'm sure those were not my words, but the sentiment was still the same. Everything happens for their reasons. Notice I didn't say everything happens for a reason. Once I rented an apartment from a woman named Betty in Manhattan. It was a great rent-controlled building in Chelsea, third-floor apartment. Betty had lived in that apartment for 30 years prior to me. One day, Betty went out to New Jersey with a friend of hers to see his new house that was under construction. When they got to the site, they got out of the car, and he was distracted on his cell phone. She went up to the front door, walked in, immediately fell to the basement. There was no floor. Anything can change in an instant. In one instant, everything can change. Often when things happen unexpectedly, like a sudden illness or a death, people often ruminate on why. Why me? Why us? Why now? Because we're meaning-making creatures, our brains tend to construct stories to make sense of all things. Challenge is, our thoughts are often incomplete and fraught with many, many biases. The thing about that why question is that it's futile. To try to figure out why anything happens is like to try to find a particular pebble in the sand amongst millions, even zillions of specks. There are so many reasons leading to any happening, usually many specks linked together, that racking our brain to figure out the reason can lead to stress, depression, or worse. Why did Todd take his life? Why did Betty take that fall? The thing about that why question is that it often leads us to the blame and fault game, pointing fingers at ourselves or others, as if any one reason could suffice. The truth of the matter is that there are so many reasons, so many variables that lead to the cascading causes that lead to the outcomes in our lives. Causes can range from the side of the bed you woke up on in the morning, to whether or not you decided to snooze, to the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil that led to the tornado in Texas. Even amongst all of these variables, we can stand strong in our confidence that we got this. And no matter what has happened, we can, moving forward, which is the only way to go, spoiler alert, we can and will and are doing better starting right now. The world is changing at a very rapid rate. Healthcare, education, undeniably in politics, even the weather, this thing called global weirding. How can we help each other remain sane and stable and kind through the tremendous tumult of uncertainty we face? How can we help people learn to struggle well throughout all of the uncertainty and change in our world? I say first, we'd be better off and best off if we just surrender to what is. We're always where we need to be when we're there. Our greatest pain can be our greatest teacher and our greatest force for change. Then, instead of asking why, we'd be better off with a different question, a more future-oriented question. The question is, what next? This question requires that we learn to think like Olympic athletes, to learn to see and prospect the vibrant future and then get pulled by it. This question really enables us as change agents to step into our most expansive, most abundant, most aspirational, most affirmative kind of thinking, which is a skill, a set of skills really, that we can learn. Especially in this era of uncertainty, it's so easy to catastrophize and worry about what if, what next. Worry is such a misuse of our imaginations. When we learn to think expansively, when we learn to think abundantly, this is not in neglect or an aside of the problems, but instead, this kind of thinking really helps us build a psychological capital which research shows helps us learn to creatively and cooperatively solve those problems even better. As catalysts of change, we can learn to think differently. In fact, it's been said time and time again, we can't solve the world's problems with the same level of thinking that created them. One way we can do this, or another way we could do this to learn to think about how we think and to change our neural networks, is to change another question. So often we're so good at asking what's wrong. What about asking what's right? When we ask others this question, what's good, we prime for spotting and focusing on the wins, the strengths, what's working. Doing so helps us, like I said, build this psychological capital to solve the problems more creatively. The thing is, things change every day. We change every second of every day. And when we work together as change agents, we can solve our problems, we can learn to live in a more abundant future. You know, I got my start about 15 years ago as a public school teacher. And right out of college, I saw many kids not feel good about who they were. It really, really concerned me. It reminded me how I felt when I was a student, actually. But as a teacher, I had a way different vantage point from the other side of that desk. When I tapped into some of those kids' lives, I saw families a little dysfunctional. And it was the first time in my life as a young 20-something that I looked at my family and I thought, ooh, boy, we could do better. We could do better to look out for the well-being of each other. And what would that mean then for the world? It's interesting, at this inflection point in human history, we are living in a world that I think are positional leaders not being equipped with the open, heart-centered, and authentic ways that are called for in our time. And that's why it's up to us, the change agents, the influencers, who I call the social emotional leaders, the people who are out here to remind us all that the heart is the engine of change. And when we work together to ask different questions, despite whatever the circumstances are, we can and will and are moving in the direction of something better and different. Ben Franklin once said, probably not far from here, that there are 3 types of people in the world: the immovable, the movable, and people who move. It is my belief that if more of us see ourselves as change agents, more of us move in the world as social emotional leaders, that's then what will create the movement. I thought that was an idea worth spreading. Thank you.